I'm Corey Prophet Boyd, and this is Say It Anyway.
Say it anyway with Corey Prophet Boyd. Say it anyway. Say it anyway with Corey Prophet Boyd. Say it anyway.
Hey, friend. I'm really glad you're here today, and I hope you've had a great week. This week, I actually received a note from a listener asking if I had ever felt lonely, even when I wasn't alone. And it really got me thinking. So, I want to spend a few minutes talking about loneliness, because I think most of us know what it feels like to be alone, but loneliness can be much harder to understand when you look around and realize you're surrounded by people who genuinely care about you. I've experienced that kind of loneliness at different times in my life, and for a long time, I thought the answer had something to do with finding the right people, finding somewhere I belonged, or somehow creating enough connection around me that the loneliness would finally disappear. What I eventually learned about myself was much more complicated than that, and it changed the way I understand what it means to feel truly connected. One of the strongest examples of this in my life happened when my mom died. I had more support than anyone could ever dream of having, and I knew how fortunate I was to have people surrounding me with an incredible amount of love during one of the most painful experiences of my life. I could see that love, and somewhere inside me I knew it was there. But the person I wanted was my mom, and there was no amount of love from anyone else that could change the reality that she was gone. As I started to think about it, I remember feeling almost secluded from reality during that time, as though the world and all the people trying to support me were somewhere I couldn't completely reach. I appreciated them and loved them, and I knew they were doing everything they could to help me. Yet I still felt incredibly alone because none of them were her. Looking back, I think that experience taught me something about loneliness that I hadn't fully understood before. Sometimes you can be surrounded by an extraordinary amount of love and still ache for a connection that the people around you simply cannot provide. For me, therapy helped, and so did allowing myself to grieve instead of expecting myself to somehow hurry through something that had totally changed my life. As some of the initial shock began to wear off, I slowly became more aware of just how much support had been around me the entire time. And being able to recognize it gave me a tremendous sense of safety and gratitude. The loss was still there, and I still missed my mom, but gradually I was able to feel the love that had been trying to reach me through the fog of everything I was experiencing. That period of my life also caused me to think about other times when I had felt lonely, because loneliness certainly didn't begin for me when my mom died. I spent a large part of my childhood and early adulthood feeling as though I didn't completely fit into the world around me, and school was probably one of the places where I felt that most strongly. I grew up in a small Kentucky town where many of the kids around me had a very small town way of seeing the world, largely because it was the only world they had ever known. And I was already beginning to recognize that there were parts of me that didn't fit comfortably inside some of those expectations. For many years, I thought the loneliness I felt was primarily about being different from the people around me. And I'm sure that was part of it, but as I grew older and became much more interested in understanding myself, I began to recognize something I hadn't considered before. I wanted very badly to feel understood by other people while there were still parts of myself that I hadn't completely taken the time to understand. And when I say that, I'm talking about much more than my sexual orientation. I'm talking about getting comfortable with the whole person I was becoming, including the parts of myself I liked and the parts I didn't particularly like, while also becoming curious about the parts I hadn't even acknowledged yet. That process didn't happen overnight, and I don't think any of us ever reach some magical point where we completely understand everything about ourselves. But in my personal experience, learning how to genuinely know myself changed my relationship with loneliness. I began to realize how difficult it is to feel completely at home with other people when you don't yet feel at home within yourself. That doesn't mean knowing yourself guarantees you'll never feel lonely, because I certainly still do sometimes, and I would never suggest that loneliness has one simple explanation. What it did for me was help me recognize that sometimes the connection I was searching for outside myself also needed to exist within myself, and over time I became much more comfortable with my own company. So if you're listening to me today while feeling lonely despite having people around you, I hope you'll resist the urge to judge yourself for that feeling. Instead, maybe you can become curious about it and ask yourself what you're actually longing for, because the answer may tell you something important about the kind of connection you're missing. There have been many times in my life when the answer to that question would have been another person. After my mom died, I wanted my mom. And there wasn't a philosophical lesson or amount of self-reflection that could substitute for the relationship I was grieving. There have been other times, though, when I was searching the world for a feeling of belonging that I eventually realized I also needed to develop within myself, and understanding the difference between those experiences has helped me understand my own loneliness much more clearly. If the loneliness you're experiencing feels overwhelming or continues to interfere with your life, I hope you'll consider talking with a qualified mental health professional, because therapy was an important part of my own experience, and there's nothing about this conversation that I would want you to interpret as a substitute for professional help. I'm simply sharing something I learned from living through my own seasons of loneliness, because perhaps some part of it will help you understand yours a little better. And maybe the next time that feeling shows up, before you immediately decide that you need more people around you, you can sit quietly with yourself for a moment and ask, what am I actually missing right now? There may be times when the answer is someone you love, and there may be times when what you're longing for is a deeper connection with yourself. Either answer deserves your attention, because feeling lonely doesn't mean you aren't loved, and being surrounded by love doesn't mean you're incapable of feeling lonely. Sometimes those truths simply exist together. So I hope wherever you are right now, you can give yourself enough quiet to listen for whatever your own answer might be. And I want to thank you so much for spending these few minutes with me today to talk about this. I'm Corey Prophet Boyd, and until next time, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and don't be afraid to say it anyway.
Say it anyway. With Corey Prophet Boyd. Say it anyway. Say it anyway. With Corey Prophet Boyd. Say it